What's going on YouTube? Username Kite562 here, and welcome to episode 1 of Sherlock Sundays. Now, these episodes will be every Sunday at 11 a.m. whenever I get around to it. Like, I know I announced it being a weekly kind of thing, but I just feel more comfortable uploading these and scheduling them to release on my channel every Sunday at 11 a.m. whenever I can. So anyway, on with my review of A Study in Scarlet. Now, A Study in Scarlet is the first of 4 of the Sherlock Holmes novels, at least according to my all-in-one omnibus that I'll leave a little tab up here for my video for my first time reading of Sherlock Holmes, but this is just me documenting my thoughts on what I thought about my experience with Novel 1, A Study in Scarlet, which it'll be episode 1 of my Sherlock Sunday series, which again will be every Sunday at 11 a.m. So, the story of A Study in Scarlet is separated into 2 parts of like 2 different perspectives. Part 1 being the Reminiscences of Watson, or Reminisce of Watson. So, it's something like that, and it's from Sherlock's new partner, John Watson, a medical doctor from the war, which he suffered a shoulder injury in the Second Afghanistan War, or Anglo-Afghanistan War, from a bullet wound. I mean, I have it written here in my notes. Yeah, John Watson was shot in the shoulder by a Giselle bullet, which shattered the bone and grazed the subclavian artery, page 5, chapter 1, Mr. Sherlock Holmes. And I have to say, part 1 was a really descriptive and really well written part, and it was just all in all enjoyable. Like, I really loved how human and enthusiastic Sherlock was, and along with Watson, since part 1's mainly from John Watson's perspective, since when it comes to reading Sherlock Holmes, I thought it was going to be set up like an Agatha Christie novel where the reader could, follow along and figure out who did it. No, let me make this clear. Sherlock Holmes is a completely different writing style than Agatha Christie. Basically, from what I read in A Study in Scarlet, you get part 1, one perspective, part 2, another perspective, but at the end of the 7 chapters of each volume of the novel, since A Study in Scarlet's separated into 2 7-chapter perspectives, is how I see it. But all in all, it was a really enjoyable experience. So you, as the reader, just have to observe what unfolds and not try to take down as many notes like you would with an Agatha Christie novel, and just take it in and observe what happens with this case. So the story of A Study in Scarlet is Sherlock and Watson try to investigate this murder of a guy named Enoch J. Drebber, and a lot of crazy things happen, and it's just absolutely nuts. But the one thing that really stays consistent is that it's a really well described story, and all in all, Sherlock is just a really solid and really well written character, and I've written down some notes from the book, like the early on chapters of like Sherlock's Limits. So, according to Watson, literature, he has nil to no knowledge of philosophy, nil, knowledge of astronomy, nil, knowledge of politics, kind of feeble on that. The list has 12 points altogether on page 12, chapter 2, The Science of Deduction. So again, you mainly have to observe, truly, instead of just seeing, since they're compartmentalized into 2 different categories, which I thought was really fascinating. And another side note about Sherlock Holmes: Sherlock plays the violin well, good practical knowledge of British law, is an expert single stick player. I think that could be cricket or something. If you want to leave a comment down below, please do so. And he's a rather skilled swordsman. Watson also comments Holmes that he reminds me of Edgar Allan Poe's Dupin, which I don't know who that could be a reference to, but again, please let me know down in the comments below. Just let this start out to be a discussion. So, for point number 4, the first murder mystery happens in Chapter 3, the Lauriston Gardens mystery. So, the plot for the story is Tobias Gregson to Mr. Holmes. Well, Tobias tells Mr. Holmes about a mysterious death of Enoch Day Drebber. So, there was no signs of a robbery or a struggle, just him lying on the floor in a small pool of blood with the word Rach written in blood on the wall, which Rach in this case is German for revenge. And that was from Chapter 3, page 16 and 17 from A Study in Scarlet, Part 1, Reminiscences of Watson. So my theory was, could Mr. Drebber have been injected with something and the culprits used very strategic movements to cover their tracks to not leave any evidence? Like, think about it. If it was something, like an injection, the perpetrator could have covered Enoch's mouth, shot him in the neck, and have gloves on, by the way, and just really strategize his movements to make sure there isn't any signs of a struggle, no evidence or anything like that, hardly any footprints, fingerprints, whatnot. I just thought this was a really thought-provoking moment for Chapter 3, and it was just a really enjoyable and very descriptive experience with how the whole scene was described. It was just, I could really imagine it in my mind. I could really picture it. And it was just, all in all, a wonderful read altogether. So, Holmes and Watson set off to talk to a man named John Rance, who lives at 46 Audley Court, Kennington Park Gate. Page 22, Chapter 3, A Study in Scarlet. Again, Part 1, The Reminiscences of Watson. And a word that really caught me off guard was trichinopoly, which is a style of Viking metal weaving, almost like a Celtic knot in a sense. So maybe the culprit could have had a suit with Celtic knot buttons on the wrist. Who knows? The person could have been really tall, really buff, and revenge was on their mind when they did the crime. Who knows? Read A Study in Scarlet. So, after a few chapters, during the scene, they also found a wedding ring that could have belonged to some woman. So they put an ad in the paper, and Mr. Holmes uses John Watson's name as the advertiser. So they get the attention of a woman named Miss Sawyer, which she answered Holmes' advertisement for a missing wedding ring. Sherlock used John Watson's name, as I said before. So it turns out Mrs. Sawyer's daughter name is Sally Dennis, I think married to a guy named Thomas Dennis or Tom Dennis. And that was from Chapter 5, page 30. So, according to my next point, Mr. Drebble was supposed to catch the first evening train at 9:15 p.m. There was another that departed at 11 p.m., according to Mr. Drebble's secretary, Mr. Joseph Stangerton, page 35, Chapter 6 of A Study in Scarlet, Reminiscences of John Watson. Again, this video will be in 2 parts in one video, so there's that. So, my next point that I want to talk about, it turns out Alice Charpenter and her mother, Madame Charpenter, that leads up to point number 10. Arthur Charpenter was leaving the Charpenters' boarding establishment when Mr. Drebble burst into the room hastily asking for Alice's hand in marriage while trying to bring her closer to the door, page 37, Chapter 6. So, Arthur, he's a hot-headed man, and Watson thought he could have done it, along with Tobias. It was just a really thought-provoking experience with this story, and it was just all around enjoyable. When the story continues on, Tobias Gregson has a theory that Mr. Dribble was hit in the stomach a few times by Arthur Charpenter, since, according to his mother, Arthur was carrying with him a stout oak kugel when Arthur was following Mr. Dribble. So, that's within part 1 of A Study in Scarlet. So, Joseph Stagerton suffered a deep stab in the left side of himself, which might have penetrated his heart, causing his death. And then again, the word rage appears in Blood Again, chapter 7, page 40. So, according to him, after Joseph Stagerton gets stabbed, just a whole lot of things unfold. Like, there's this mysterious telegram within Stagerton's room. It took me for a loop in a good way. I was completely stumped. Oh, excuse me. So, my next point is that the man who murdered Stagerton had a brown coat and was tall and had a reddish face. Reddish angry, reddish from what, being sunburnt? Who knows? Read A Study in Scarlet. So, again, another side note that I made is somebody could have used those pills to kill Mr. Dribble as well. Crushed the pills up well enough, mixed with the water, load into a syringe. Make it look like natural causes. And like I stated before, almost at the very beginning of this video, is that the criminal could have put his hand over Mr. Dribble's mouth like this, and then did it with gloves and whatnot. Just typical, dressed up like a doctor, or just geared up well enough to just make it look like natural causes. And I have to say, the scene with the terrier, where they test out the alkali poisoning pill that was like mashed up, that was a really well written story, well, part of the story. So, yeah, that's the end of part 1, and now on to part 2, The Country of the Saints. So, the plot for part 2 of A Study in Scarlet, The Country of the Saints, a group of traveling Mormons from Nauvoo, Illinois in the year 1847 make their way through the Sierra Blanco Desert to the Rio Grande. They explain their journey to a man named John Ferrier. So, amongst the group of Mormons, could Brother Stagerton be related to the late Joseph Stagerton? That is the question I had here in my mind as I read this. So, my next point goes on, is that a little girl named, from the beginning of the second story, is named Lucy Ferrier. She is the adopted daughter of John Ferrier. And then on top of that, Kimball, Johnson, Drebber are the 4 elders of the group, well, 3 of the 4 elders. And then my question was, one part of the Drebber and Stagerton family, a powerful religious influence? So the late Joseph Stagerton and Enoch Drebber were considered outcasts to this group? I mean, again, read A Study in Scarlet, because I'm not going to go any further than that, because I really don't want to spoil this story to you all if you're new to Sherlock Holmes. I mean, as I read this story, that's what I thought at the time. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong, and I won't be mad about it. So, point number 5 for part 2. A young Jefferson Hope had sparked romantic feelings towards a young Lucy Ferrier. Hope also became familiar with Lucy's father, whilst also becoming great friends with him over time. And that's part 2, chapter 2, page 56, A Study in Scarlet, The Country of the Saints. So, Jefferson Hope leaves his beloved Lucy for 2 months and goes on a trip on horseback or muleback, just to get some work done, just so him and Lucy can plan their future together to be wed. And then another one of the high four holy Mormon elites, Brother Brigham Young, talks to John Ferrier of how he has not affirmed all of his values of his Mormon faith. Page 59, Chapter 3, A Study in Scarlet, The Country of the Saints. So, if you definitely read this story, check it out for more details. It was just, all in all, both parts were really well descripted and really well thought out in my mind. So, again, for point number 8, so John, Lucy, and Jefferson planned their escape to somewhere safe, away from the Holy Four, which is the 4 brothers that I mentioned. Brother Brigham, Joseph Stagerton, and Kinball Johnson, Drebber, and then there's also Brigham, Kendall Jensen, Johnston, Drebber, and then Kendall Johnston, Drebber, and then Brigham. There we go. I'll just make it a text animation on there that those are the Holy Four. Again, later on in the book, Watson discovers Jefferson Hope has an aortic aneurysm that could burst at any moment from Jefferson's time in the Salt Lake City Mountains. Part 2 of The Country of the Saints, Chapter 6, page 75. So overall, it was a solid, enjoyable story for my first time reading Sherlock Holmes. Very descriptive chapters, just all of them had me at the edge of my seat. They were all really very atmospheric in my opinion. Almost as detailed as a Stephen King novel. So, yeah, I'm really not going to score this video. I just wanted to document my thoughts with you all. So, yeah, that's for episode 1 of Sherlock Sundays. Leave a like, comment, subscribe if you enjoy the content on this channel. This is Kite562 signing out, and as always, I hope you have a wonderful day, everybody. Later.